It was a warm spring morning in Atlanta, the kind where sunlight filters gently through trees, and the air carries the quiet hum of an unhurried city. Mothers pushed strollers. Retirees sipped lattes on sidewalk benches. Life moved forward in soft, deliberate steps. On the corner of Juniper and Pontolian stood the Eastbrook Women's Medical Center, a luxury clinic dressed in glass, marble, and the kind of silence only money could afford. Inside, cool air drifted over leather chairs and flower arrangements too perfect to be real. Outside the front doors, Danielle Carter paused, point one hand on her belly, 6 months pregnant, the other tightening the strap on her well-used tote bag. She wore a soft blue maternity dress, clean and simple, hugging her figure with effortless grace. Her skin, a radiant deep brown, glowed in the morning light, but it also drew silent stares from passing couples who didn't meet her eyes. She whispered down to her baby, "Let's get this checkup done. Daddy'll be here soon." Her voice was calm, but her eyes kept glancing at the time. 10:16. Ethan was supposed to meet her by 10:30. He'd called that morning, caught in a last-minute situation at the U.S. District Office, but promised he'd come. And Ethan never broke a promise. Still, this was supposed to be their first 4D scan, a glimpse of the life they created together. And now, she was walking into this place alone. The automatic doors hissed open. Inside, the silence was heavier. The kind of quiet that doesn't just hush voices, it smothers them. A young blonde receptionist glanced up, then looked back down, pretending not to see Danielle at all. Danielle approached with polite confidence, the kind earned from years of being in spaces that made her prove she belonged. "Good morning. Danielle Carter. I have a 10:30 with Dr. Halbert." The receptionist blinked. Her gaze lingered, not overtly hostile, but far from welcoming. "Dr. Hallard?" she asked, mispronouncing the name like it was foreign. Danielle corrected her gently. "Halbert. It was confirmed over the phone last night." A pause. Then the woman shoved a clipboard toward her without a smile. "Fill this out." Danielle sat in the waiting area, pen poised, tried to ignore the whispers from across the room. Designer handbags clutched tighter. One woman shifted her purse closer, eyes flicking up and down Danielle's frame. A man across the room stared at the wall like she wasn't even human. She breathed slowly. "This is about the baby. You're here for your child." That be why the time her name was called. Her forms were filled with perfect penmanship, even though her hands trembled slightly. The nurse didn't greet her, just held a clipboard and walked ahead like Danielle was luggage. They passed halls of polished perfection, framed photos of glowing white mothers holding swaddled babies. Not one woman on the wall looked like Danielle. They reached room 3B. The nurse opened the door and gestured without a word. Danielle stepped in. The air smelled of antiseptic and lavender. A monitor blinked silently. The bed was too neat, too cold. She checked her phone. 10:44. Ethan was late. And then the door opened. Doctor Lindsay Halbert entered with sharp heels, a white coat, and a bun pulled so tight it looked painful. No smile, no greeting. She simply stared. "So, you're Danielle Carter?" she finally said, her voice like polished steel. Danielle sat up straighter. "Yes, we're doing the 4D scan today." Dr. Halbert's eyes raked over her. Not like a physician assessing a patient, but like a judge sizing up someone beneath her. "You came alone." Danielle nodded. "My husband had an emergency at work. He's on his way." A ghost of a smirk flickered. "Of course." Then came the poison. "Let me guess you don't know who the father is?" Or maybe he decided this morning he'd had enough responsibility. Typical. Danielle froze. "Excuse me." Dr. Halbert turned her back, shuffling papers, then looked over her shoulder with disdain. "This isn't some public clinic. This is a facility for mothers who care, not women who show up alone, looking like they came off a bus station bench." Danielle stood. "I scheduled this appointment. I confirmed it. I came here with respect." "You people are always respectful when you want something," the doctor hissed. "Then come the accusations and the drama." "Not today." Danielle felt her heart slam against her ribs. "I'm leaving," she said firmly. "Oh, you're not going anywhere." Dr. Halbert glanced around the room. "My Cartier watch. It was on that counter. Now it's gone." Danielle blinked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," the doctor snapped, "I've had enough charity cases walk in here and walk out with more than they came in with." She stormed out. Moments later, two security officers entered, both white, both emotionless. "Miss Carter," the older one began, "you've been identified as a person of interest in a theft report. You'll need to come with us." "I'm pregnant," Danielle said, voice trembling. "I haven't taken anything." "You can explain that downstairs," the younger one said, already stepping forward. "I want to call my husband." "You'll have your chance," the older officer muttered. They flanked her. She had no space to resist. She followed them into the staff-only corridors, down sterile hallways not meant for patients. Cold, isolated. The room they brought her to was small and dim. A desk, some old monitors, and a hard plastic chair bolted to the floor. "Sit." Danielle lowered herself slowly, her hand over her belly. "I need to call my husband." "Phone." "Now." The younger one snapped. She hesitated, then handed it over. He turned it off and locked it in a drawer. "You're not under arrest," the older one said, "but you're being detained." "For what?" she asked. "Where's the proof?" "I never touched her desk." "This isn't up for debate." Danielle stared at them, at the flickering light above, the blank walls, the absence of cameras. "This is wrong," she said quietly, voice filled with steel. "I came here to care for my baby. You don't get to treat me like a criminal." The younger officer smirked. "Lady, save the speech." She swallowed the scream rising in her throat. The baby shifted inside her. And then, at the front desk, the glass doors parted again. Ethan Carter stepped inside. Tailored charcoal suit. DOJ lapel pin gleaming in the sunlight. Calm, cold, unstoppable. He asked a single question, and when they hesitated to answer, when they stumbled over their lies, that's when the reckoning began. They just kept her there, isolated, because they could. Minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Danielle stared at the blank wall, her mind racing. She pictured Ethan walking through the clinic's doors, his calm but unyielding presence cutting through the receptionist's excuses. She imagined the moment he realized she wasn't in the exam room, the way his eyes would narrow, his jaw tightening. And she held on to that image because she knew her husband was coming at tea precisely 10:52 a.m. Ethan Carter stepped through Eastbrook's glass doors, his polished black Oxfords clicking against the marble floor. His charcoal suit, tailored to his tall, lean frame, was impeccable, the gold lapel pin of the Department of Justice glinting under the chandelier's light. At 38, Ethan carried the quiet intensity of a man who had spent years navigating the intersections of law, power, and justice. His rich, dark skin stood in sharp contrast to the sterile brightness of the lobby, and his presence drew cautious glances from the staff and patients alike. But Ethan didn't return their stares. His focus was singular, his deep brown eyes locked on the reception desk. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and authoritative, the kind that commanded attention without effort. "I'm looking for Danielle Carter. She had a 10:30 appointment with Dr. Halbert. I'm her husband." Kayla, the receptionist, looked up, her smile faltering under the weight of his gaze. One moment, sir. Let me check." Her fingers hesitated above the keyboard, her eyes flicking to the screen. "It says, she's currently not in the exam room." "Where is she?" Ethan's tone was calm, but edged with steel, each word precise. Kayla swallowed, her voice faltering. "Security was notified about a situation. I'm not exactly sure what happened." "What situation?" Ethan leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the space between them. I think she's downstairs in the security office," Kayla stammered. "There was a misunderstanding, I think." "Dr. Halbert, I need to see her now," Ethan said, his voice firmer, unwavering. "Take me there, or call someone who will." Kayla stood, her face paling. "I'll get the floor manager. No need." Ethan reached into his jacket, producing a slim leather wallet. He opened it with deliberate precision, revealing a federal identification badge bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice and his title. Deputy Director, Office of Civil Rights Enforcement. Kayla's breath hitched. Ethan held the badge steady for 3 seconds, letting its weight settle, then returned it to his pocket. "Where is the security office?" "Down the corridor, past the staff elevators," Kayla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "First door on the left." Without another word, Ethan turned, his stride sharp and purposeful. His fingers curled tightly at his sides, the only outward sign of the fury building beneath his calm exterior. He navigated the sterile hallway with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding spaces, passing staff who averted their eyes as if sensing the storm in his wake. At the end of the corridor, a metallic door stood slightly ajar, muffled voices leaking through. Ethan pushed it open. Inside, Danielle sat in a hard plastic chair, her hands resting protectively on her belly, her expression a mix of fear and restrained fury. The 2 security officers, one older with a clipboard, the other younger, chewing gum, froze as Ethan entered. The younger one straightened, his gums stilling in his mouth. The older one's eyes narrowed, assessing. "Can we help you?" the older officer asked, his tone cautious. Ethan stepped fully into the room, his presence commanding the space. "Yes," he said, his voice low and unyielding. "You can help me by standing down and explaining in detail why you have illegally detained my wife without due cause, without counsel, and without access to her personal property." Danielle's head snapped toward him, a gasp escaping her lips. "Ethan," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. He moved to her side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm here," he said softly. "It's over now." Then he turned back to the officers, his tone sharpening. "I want the name of the individual who ordered this detainment, the report that authorized it, and access to every minute of surveillance footage involving my wife." Immediately, the younger officer took a step back, his bravado faltering. The older one hesitated, his clipboard lowering slightly. "This isn't, look, we were just following protocol. You're not trained in constitutional law." "I am," Ethan said, his voice cutting like a blade. "And you violated several. Give me the footage before I call the state attorney general." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Danielle closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. Not from weakness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, of having her dignity defended. The older officer nodded stiffly, turning to the console to cue the security footage. The monitors flickered, showing hallway feeds, the waiting room, and finally the exam room Danielle had been in. The timestamp read 10:41 a.m. The footage played. Danielle entered alone, calm, polite, touching only the doorknob and the chair. She never approached the counter. At 10:52 a.m., Dr. Halbert exited, glancing at an empty tray, touching her wrist, then storming out with visible agitation. "Freeze it," Ethan said, pointing at the screen. Zoom in on that tray. The officer complied, the image sharpening to reveal a gleaming Cartier watch on the counter, untouched. Danielle whispered. She left it behind. Roll forward, Ethan instructed. At 10:54 a.m., a cleaning attendant entered briefly, avoiding the tray. At 10:59 a.m., the watch was still there. Then the footage cut out. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Where's the rest? That's when the cleaning crew shifts over, the older officer admitted, sweat beading on his forehead. There's a blind spot in the handoff. Convenient, Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. He opened the desk drawer, retrieved Danielle's phone, and handed it to her gently. Then he turned back to the officers. Detaining my wife without due process is a civil rights violation. Denying her medical autonomy while pregnant borders on reckless endangerment. I'm filing formal complaints with the DOJ, and a public incident report will be submitted to the licensing board before the day ends. I suggest you prepare statements. The officers said nothing, the weight of federal authority settling over the room like a storm cloud. Danielle rose, her hands clutching her phone, her posture steadier now. I want to go upstairs, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I want to see that doctor again. Ethan nodded. Let's go. The elevator doors opened to Eastbrook's top floor, where a uniformed administrator waited outside a glass-walled conference room, his face tight with apprehension. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, he stammered. Dr. Halbert is inside. We've convened the Internal Ethics Board for immediate review. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. Let's get started. Inside, a long glass table gleamed under bright lights. 3 board members, 2 men and 1 woman, all white, sat at one end, their faces strained. Dr. Halbert sat at the far side, her arms crossed, her lips pursed, but a flicker of unease betrayed her composure. Danielle took a seat opposite her, her chin lifted, her gaze steady. Ethan remained standing, his badge visible on his lapel, a silent reminder of his authority. The board chair, a balding man in his 50s, cleared his throat. We've reviewed preliminary footage, Mr. Carter. We understand you wish to file formal action. Ethan placed a thin stack of papers on the table, typed, signed, time-stamped. My wife was falsely accused of theft, illegally detained, denied access to communication, and humiliated in a medical facility while under your care. We have footage proving the alleged theft never occurred. We also have audio recordings of degrading, racially charged comments made by your attending physician. Dr. Halbert scoffed, her voice sharp. This is absurd. I followed protocol. I had every reason to suspect. You had every reason to assume. Ethan cut in, his tone icy, based solely on her appearance. Not her behavior, not the facts, just the color of her skin and the absence of a man by her side. Danielle leaned forward, her voice clear and deliberate. You looked at me and saw something disposable. You didn't see a teacher, a wife, a mother-to-be. You didn't even see a person. You saw a problem. You humiliated me for walking into a space I had every right to be in. Dr. Halbert's eyes narrowed. That's not how it happened. Danielle's voice didn't waver. You told me I was probably abandoned, that I looked like I came from a bus station. You called me a thief before you ever spoke to me like a human being. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, one scribbling notes furiously. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady but commanding. Dr. Halbert's actions aren't just unethical, they're actionable. We're pursuing this through federal civil rights litigation. But we're also demanding transparency, a written public apology, institutional reform, mandatory anti-bias training, and her immediate suspension. The board chair's voice cracked slightly. We'll begin proceedings immediately. As the meeting adjourned, Dr. Halbert stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and stormed out without a word. No one stopped her. A week later, Eastbrook Women's Medical Center released a formal statement acknowledging the incident. Dr. Lindsay Halbert was placed on indefinite administrative leave, and a full review of patient rights procedures was initiated. Danielle received a written apology, but it was more than words.